Hey y'all, Coach in the Fight here, talking about the days of remembrance. These are 4 very important days that were added to the calendar, and the reason why our calendar has 364 days instead of 360. And in this class, I'm going to show you how one of these days is coming up, and I'm going to show you some of the importance related to these days. Now, we're looking over here at a chart that I created a while back, pointing out these 4 days on the calendar, on the sacred calendar. But the significance of the image that you're looking at is all of these events correspond to the events of the flood and the experience that Noah had, but I think they are still related to the time period we're in now, or at least coming up as we all are getting aboard the ark. Alright, so for a scriptural reference, the first place I'll bring you to is over to Jubilees chapter 6. This chapter covers a lot about Noah and the covenant given to Noah, as well as the Feast of Pentecost. But we're going to drop all the way down to verse 23 as it starts talking about the Feast of the New Moons. Verse 23 says, "And on the new moon of the first month, and on the new moon of the 4th month, and on the new moon of the 7th month, and on the new moon of the 10th month are the days of remembrance, the days of the seasons in the 4 divisions of the year. These are written and ordained as a testimony for forever." So it's telling us when these days of remembrance are to fall. We have one in the 1st, 4th, 7th, and 10th month. Now, some of these days of remembrance won't come as a surprise because they fall on other festival days. Like, for instance, the memorial of blowing of trumpets would actually be the day of remembrance of the 7th month. The day of remembrance in the 1st month, which we'll talk about a little bit in this video, is also the day of the temple cleansing. So that in itself is a big deal, and many people won't miss that day. But it is these other days of remembrance that are not so well known, like that which falls after June the 19th. That would be the day of remembrance in the 4th month, and then the day of remembrance of the 10th month. It actually falls during the week of Hanukkah, particularly the 7th day of the Feast of Hanukkah. Now we see in verse 24, it says, "And Noah ordained for them himself a feast for the generations forever, so that they have become thereby a memorial unto him." So Noah turned these days into festival days, and it's easy to understand why, knowing that, it's easy for us to remember a day that we're going to have a celebration every year. So by doing so, he kind of just marked those days out, and it wouldn't be a bad idea for us to do the same. But now you see where it goes on and starts talking about the individual months here. Like, for instance, it talks about the new moon of the 1st month. Noah was bidden to make for himself an ark. Well, those are the months that you see going around this calendar here. The 1st month, he built the ark, but that is also the same time when the earth became dry and Noah actually opened the ark up. So when we're looking at a calendar here, understanding that the sighting of the new moon should occur on April the 2nd. If we do get that sighting on April the 2nd, that would make April the 3rd the day of remembrance. That would be the first day of the 1st month for the year 2022. But while we're looking over here at this calendar, let me point out some other important days. For instance, Passover, which starts at the beginning of the 14th day of the month. That will be the evening of April the 15th in the year 2022, and that's the day when we will have the communion ceremony, that very important feast that our Messiah instituted, by which we are to gain salvation. Again, that occurs on April the 15th. Right after sunset is when you'll partake in the bread and the wine. Now, for those who will be cooking a lamb this year, they will also dispatch that lamb on the evening of the 15th after sunset. They will do a lot of the preparation on that day, but the actual cooking, because it takes more than 6 hours to cook a whole lamb over an open fire, they'll be doing that cooking on April the 16th, and it will be on the evening of April the 16th that they will start the festival of unleavened bread, which will last from the evening of April the 17th until the evening of the 23rd, which of course is the 22nd day of the lunar month and falls on April 22nd this year. And then we'll have the Feast of First Fruits, which will be the first day of that next week. That day, first fruits, is the exact day in which the Messiah presented himself before the disciples, showing that he had fully been resurrected. You remember before then he told them not to touch him because he had not been through the entire process. Well, it was on the day of first fruits that he told Thomas to put his fingers in the holes within his hands. Now, just to look at some of the other verses related to the first day of the first month, we see Genesis chapter 8 and verse 13. It was the day of remembrance, or the feast of the new moon of the first month, in which the waters dried up off of the earth, and Moses opened up the covering. And you see in Exodus chapter 40, verse 2, it says that they were commanded to set up the tabernacle of the temple of the congregation. And then in verse 17, you see that it was actually set up on the first day of the first month. But now look down at 2 Chronicles chapter 29 and verse 17, which says, "Now they began on the first day of the first month to sanctify, and on the 8th day of the month they came to the porch of the Lord. So they sanctified the house of the Lord in 8 days, and in the 7th day of the first month they made an end." So the first day of the first month is the beginning of the sanctification process. Now, of course, this involves our body, but it also involves our temple. Well, in today's date, when the temple is our body, this sanctification will be of a twofold nature. But then let's come down to Ezra chapter 7. Verse 9 says, "For upon the first day of the first month began he to go up from Babylon, and on the first day of the 5th month came he to Jerusalem, according to the good hand of God upon him." So this is talking about Ezra and how it was on the first day of the first month that he began his trek from Babylon to Jerusalem. You got to remember that he had to walk there. So that could explain why it took him 5 months to make that trek. But it started on the day of remembrance in the first month. Then you look down in chapter 10 and they start talking about strange wives and how all of the Israelites were commanded to get rid of the strange wives from their home. This would be Babylonian wives that they had married. But according to our father, back in Deuteronomy, he told them never marry Gentile wives, else they would corrupt themselves, corrupt the children, and corrupt you. So you see in the verse 17 of chapter 10 that they actually started putting these wives away, according to the bill of divorcement that Moses talked about. Now there's a couple of other mentions of the first month and the first day of the month, particularly Ezekiel chapter 29 and verse 17. This is talking about Nebuchadnezzar being given the land of Egypt into his hands. And then you have verse 18 of chapter 45, where thus saith the Lord God, in the first month, in the first day of the month, thou shalt take a young bullock without blemish and cleanse the sanctuary. So it's back to the temple cleansing. And you can see that that's what a lot of this is about on the first day of the first month, is the cleansing period. You have the sacrifice for cleansing. You have the Levites and the priests being cleansed. You have the strange wives being put away from the temple, making way for the cleansing. You have the tabernacle being reared up through that time, the sanctification of the tabernacle during the first month, and even Noah commanded to build the ark on the first month and the first day of the month. So there's a lot to the first day of the first month. I probably didn't cover everything, but let's do so down in the comment section of this video. And if you would, tell me how you plan on celebrating the day of remembrance. In the meantime, go ahead and hit that like button. Make sure you have your bell notification button pushed so you can see future classes that come out. And with that, I'm going to say shalom.